Hello, everybody, and welcome to Women at Ardent's webinar on handling difficult conversations. My name is Alumine Belone, and I am the VP of Risk Management at Ardent Health. Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone of Women at Ardent's purpose. That purpose is to elevate women within our organization by providing opportunities and resources, and increasing visibility while developing leadership skills that further enhance the network of women at Ardent. For a connected purpose on each webinar, we recognize individuals in our organization who are exceptional leaders, mentors, and a good example of our purpose of caring for people. This month, we are highlighting Martha Crombie, VP of Marketing and Planning for the Americas Division. Martha has been with Ardent since 2018. She's well-respected. She brings a wealth of knowledge to the company and truly cares about her people. Rather than caring only if the work gets done, Martha cares that the person behind the work is staying afloat and succeeding. She has a remarkable ability to support team members with exceptional skill, empathy, and bravery, and making her the definition of a servant leader. Even under stress, Martha has demonstrated leadership through her calm, respectful demeanor, and clear thinking. I personally witnessed Martha's leadership skills during Hurricane Michael. She was an exceptional member of the team, and she helped us with the recovery efforts. And the best part about Martha is that she's funny. So Martha, thank you for everything you do. Now, for our two speakers today, we have Darla Caldwell. She's the Director of Risk Management, Medical Staff Services, and Clinical Director of Employee Health for all facilities of the VSA Health System of Amarillo. She has been part of the VSA team for 29 and a half years as a medical surgical RN, clinical risk manager, and in 2006, she took over the leadership role for these three departments. But let me tell you something. Her journey with Ardent started even earlier than that. Darla was actually born at VSA, so we know that VSA has a special place in her heart. Now, Jim Hughes. Jim Hughes is our VP of Organizational Development at Ardent. He joined Ardent in 2008, serving as Director of Organizational Development for Loveless Health System before joining the corporate team in 2017. Jim leads Ardent's approach to performance management, learning and development, and service excellence, developing this program since the inauguration. Okay, I'll pass it to you, Jim and Darla.
All right. Well, thank you, Illuminae. Appreciate the intro. It's exciting to be here today and share some thoughts with you all. I think I'll start up with a little heads up of how we'll approach the presentation. What I'll do is I will present around theory and process elements, some of which the elements are part of our leadership development program at Ardent. And Darla will discuss her practical experience and real application of these models. I can tell you that it's been my pleasure preparing for this with Darla, and I really hope you enjoy the presentation. So bear with me for a second and just close your eyes. And sure, I can't see you all on camera, but I'll have to trust that you close your eyes. And I want you to think about a conversation that you know you need to have. Or consider the last time you engaged in a difficult conversation. What do you feel? The reality is that most of us feel at least anxious, uneasy, and frankly, there's a certain percentage of people that feel absolutely terrified when they consider having this type of a conversation. What I want you to know is it's pretty normal to feel this way when you're faced with having a conversation that you determine is difficult. So what's a difficult conversation? In its simplest terms, it's one that you don't want to have, right? Maybe you're sharing bad news. Maybe you made a mistake, maybe a disagreement with someone. It could even be speaking up in a meeting. That's not always the easiest thing to do. It could be that you want to give someone feedback or you feel like you have to give someone feedback. And it might be that you just have a different perspective than what someone else has, right? There's a lot of that going on in the world today. Regardless of the type of conversation, the same principles apply, and we feel like they're difficult conversations. A lot of times they're difficult because of emotion. So I want to talk a little bit about really what goes on in our brains relative to, emotion and that kind of stuff. So within the brain, there's three core areas that I'll talk about briefly. The first is the amygdala, or what some people refer to as the lizard brain or the dinosaur brain. That part of our brains is really essential because it kicks in the fight or flight response. Basically, when it senses danger, it pumps us with adrenaline so that we can react and escape in that face of danger. The problem is that part of our brain is difficult to control sometimes. So we get that kind of reaction, that reaction in our brain, fight or flight. What we have to do is we have to move past the amygdala. We have to get to the limbic brain or the emotional brain, which is where we connect with people. It's where we demonstrate caring for other people. Through that, we get to the neocortex. The neocortex is really the thinking part of the brain. It helps us apply logic and make complex decisions. It also allows us to have thoughts about our emotions, not just act them, not just feel them, but be able to actually describe and understand what's going on with emotion. The study of this type of control is really, what we call emotional intelligence. And I'll talk more about emotional intelligence in just a few minutes. What I'd like to do now is ask Darla a question about her experience. So Darla, can you tell us about a time when you had to share bad news with a patient or a patient's family and things got emotional?
Yeah, absolutely. So the most memorable case of my career actually involved a young woman who came in for a simple elective surgery, and then something went terribly, terribly wrong at the beginning of surgery, and she ended up suffering a severe anoxic brain injury. And I had to disclose to this husband and this family that their life was never going to be the same. And as you might understand, it was a terribly difficult conversation. There were many emotions that went through both the family and me as the risk manager as I walked through the findings of what had occurred. So to prepare for that, you have to take a moment before any conversation like this to assess your own feelings, because I was feeling upset that it had happened. I was sad for this family, and there was a level of frustration. And it's okay to have these feelings. You have to acknowledge those feelings, and you have to know that it's okay. You're only human. But you mentally have to prepare and be ready to control and manage those feelings and manage those emotions that you're having while you're having the conversation. So once you've reviewed in detail about what occurred so you can be completely honest with the family, you just have to go to them and know that you're going to be completely honest with them, because you will lose the family's trust if you make up an answer or you pretend to know the answer when you really don't know the answer. It's okay to not know all the answers. You just have to be able to tell that family that you don't know the answer and you're going to find the answer for them. Showing empathy towards the family is critical in any difficult conversation. You're never going to fully understand what they're going through unless you've had the exact same thing happen to you or your family. But what you can do is be empathetic to their situation and make sure you give a heartfelt apology. Keep the tone in your voice lower. Don't speak softly, but just keep your tone lower. During the conversations such as this, you may have to redirect to focus on what your goal is, because The family will get off track. If you're not careful, you'll get off track with the conversation. So make sure you redirect professionally, reminding the patient and family what the topic is. And then finally, with extremely difficult conversations like this, the family or the patient is going to start seeing you as the enemy. You're going to feel personally attacked because you're the face of whatever's happened to them. Don't take it personally. And I know it's hard because it was difficult in this situation for me. You just have to understand that the family's going to go through those stages. There's going to be anger. There's going to be resentment and frustration. And it was actually a turning point professionally for me on the way I spoke with people and the way I disclosed because of this case. Lots of valuable lessons.
Yeah, that's I know as we prepared for this presentation, you and I both shared some emotion as you described in detail the things that situation really brought up. And I mean, I respect you a great deal in that you are able to demonstrate that emotional intelligence that I talked about briefly. And it's just a perfect example here. I mean, emotional intelligence is really that ability to control emotion, understand your emotion, understand the emotion of others, and really, kind of deal with those dynamics, right? Everyone's probably heard the phrase, it's not the issue, it's how you respond to the issue that matters. And I'd say that is particularly true when dealing with difficult conversations. We have to understand how we're responding, to the issues that are brought up. You talked a lot about managing emotion, recognizing what you can control. And I want to make sure that everyone realizes that it's not like showing emotion isn't a problem. In fact, it's actually part of what makes us human, right? Showing emotion is a positive thing. It's a way that we can connect. But the thing is, we have to control our outbursts. We have to control that emotion, right? So again, it's okay to show it, just not allow it to kind of get away from us, right? The other thing I want to be clear on with emotion, and this is I think a good comment to make, particularly because this is a Women at Ardent presentation, is this isn't a male and female thing, right? This isn't, we're not talking that, males have no emotion and females show emotion. It's not male and female. Both genders show emotion. Both genders need to manage, our own emotions and make sure that they're appropriate in adding to the conversation, in that we show we care and we get connected. We show empathy, as you talked about, but not have them kind of get out of control. So we just have a couple of tips, kind of some do's and don'ts for, how to control yourself and frankly, understand how the other person's dealing with. So take a deep breath, right? And I'm sure, Darla, it's probably part of your process to prepare. Take a deep breath as you're entering into these conversations. Define the situation, right? Like really understand, what are the details? What's going on here? Acknowledge the impact of the situation, right? A lot of times difficult conversations are difficult because they're meaningful, right? They're important. And, it's something that we have to deal with. The other aspect is remember and kind of remind yourself that you're committed to deal with the relationship side. So it's our theory that when difficult conversations are really done well, we can actually enrich the relationship as a part of it versus I think one of the fears that we have going into them is that it destroys the relationship. So honesty, authenticity can really enrich the relationship versus damaging it. Second, some don'ts in these types of conversations. Don't allow yourself to be triggered by emotions, no matter how difficult and how, like to Darla's point earlier, you might feel attacked, right? No matter how much you feel attacked, don't allow yourself to be triggered. And don't, this is important kind of leading up to it, don't triangulate the message, right? Don't share your thoughts and feelings with others, hoping that it's going to get back to that individual. You want to deal with that situation yourself. And the last thing here is don't just focus on your own perspective, right? Be open to learning, adjusting, and once you understand the other person's perspective, it might change how you think about it. So be okay with kind of shifting on the fly once you understand how the other person's how they're going to respond to the situation. Which really brings me to the other individual, right? So not only do you have to control your own emotions in these types of conversations, you also have to try to understand and manage the others, right? Darla talked about that a little bit in her last example, is that you may have to help them get to a place where they're able to control their own emotions. You need to get to the facts behind, what's driving that emotion, because people behave the way they do for many, many reasons. And you really have to learn what's driving it so that you can respond accordingly. Right? So I hope that makes sense. In addition to the emotional side of things, it's our responsibility in these conversations to also deal with the practical side. So question again for you, Darla, is, can you talk about how, or do you have an example of where, the practical needs had to be dealt with in addition to the personal needs and the emotional side?
Absolutely. So sometimes your state or federal laws are actually what's going to govern the conversation. And for an example on that, we had a patient that was admitted after a stroke and was still making the majority of decisions for himself. The stroke unfortunately continued to progress and he became very unstable. The physician discussed comfort care because it was obvious that he was not going to recover from the injury. And the legal next of kin was the mother, but there was a sister who had a very, very strong personality, very colorful personality, and spoke for the family. The family decided they wanted aggressive care, so the patient was intubated, and the doctors continued to discuss because he was just going downhill day by day with the family on comfort care. At some point during the patient's stay, the sister produced a medical power of attorney. Now remember, in this scenario, it's all based on Texas law, so you have to be just really familiar with your laws and what you can and can't do. But in Texas, the medical power of attorney, speaks for the patient whenever they're not able to speak for themselves. And it assigned the sister as the medical power of attorney. It also, interestingly enough, had a living will associated with it. And in the living will, the patient made it clear that he didn't want to live on a ventilator. He didn't want he didn't want anything heroic done. And he wanted to be removed from life support if the need arose. And at this point, when I had a discussion with the sister and talked to her about what his wishes were when he was able to make them still, she announced that she was a minister on national TV and she brought patients back to life after they had died, and that she was going to heal her brother. And she refused to have him removed from the ventilator and started becoming very, very aggressive. So, to prepare for the last conversation I had with her, I really had to make sure that I knew the laws because I didn't want to tell her anything incorrectly. And I discussed the facts. I stuck to strictly the facts on what the law says, what the power of attorney said, what the living will said. Because in the living will it said the power of attorney can make decisions for me as long as it doesn't go against my wishes stated in this document. And ultimately I told her, you have a choice in this because families feel out of control. They are out of control. They have no way of preventing what's ultimately going to happen. And you need to give as much control back to them as you can. And so I gave her a choice. And her choices weren't probably what she wanted to hear, but I told her that you can either continue to be aggressive and continue to fight this, and we're going to have you escorted out of the hospital. And we're going to do what his wishes state, and we were going to remove him from the ventilator. Or what we would prefer you do, because we want you to be here with your brother when he dies, is, accept the fact that this is what he wanted and hold his hand while he passes. And that's what she did.
incredibly difficult situations. I respect you greatly for what you have to do. So Darla, and more great examples of dealing both with the personal needs, the emotional side, as well as the practical need. So what I want to share next is really it comes back to a couple of models that of how we teach this to our leaders across the organization. We work with a content provider called DDI, and our leadership program is called Leading with Purpose. So everything we do is really geared towards helping our leaders develop the skills necessary to do just that. So the first model that's on your screen, it's called the key principles. And the key principles are really about that personal side of things. So really five aspects to it. The first being, esteem. So what we're saying is anytime you engage in a difficult conversation, it's important to maintain and even enhance the individual's self-esteem as you go through the process. Second, listen and respond with empathy. Third, encourage involvement, right? So even in this very difficult case, you were able to give the sister a choice, right? To give an option. So you were involving that individual in the conversation, and creating a commitment to move forward in a certain way. Share your thoughts and feelings, so disclose how you feel, build trust in the situation, and then finally provide support, right? So help others help them think through their options, and keep responsibility where it lies, depending on the type of conversation it is. So that's the model for dealing with the emotional side or the personal needs in a conversation like this. Next is the model for dealing with the practical needs. So this model in a lot of ways is a process, right? So this is the process for managing through difficult conversations. First, you want to be able to open the conversation, describe the purpose for it, and also talk about the importance of that conversation. And this goes for any type of difficult conversation, not just disclosures, as Darla has been talking about, but like I said earlier, maybe you have to talk about a mistake that you made. Maybe you need to give some feedback to someone. Maybe you want to share a different perspective to someone. And so this process really falls any types of those types of conversations. Clarify. So clarify what's the situation. What information do you have? Explore the thoughts from the other individual as well. So kind of get all that stuff out on the table. Develop perspective, right? So the third step is really developing perspective. You're seeking and you're discussing ideas. You're exploring different alternatives. What options do we have? How can we move forward? And then the fourth step is really agreeing, right? Specifying the actions that need to be taken. There may be actions on your side. There may be actions on the other individual side. And then confirming how you move forward, and if necessary, how you'll track progress, right? You might not be able to solve this in one conversation. So your agreement might be, let's get back together. We're going to talk, next week when we have more information, or we'll get back together and we'll talk about, what new alternatives we've uncovered since we last spoke. So it may not be that you handle this in one time frame. You might have to come back to the conversation. And then finally, closing out, right? Close out, what have we agreed to, confirm the next steps, and really move forward to close the conversation. So a pretty straightforward model. We're balancing both the personal side of the equation as well as the practical needs in the equation, and managing through and having that difficult conversation. One of the other aspects that I think is really important when we're either preparing for a conversation or even actively engaged in a conversation is asking questions. Questions allow, if you're preparing for the conversation, questions will allow you to develop a perspective. They'll allow you to combat any unconscious bias that you might have going into it. And then during the conversation, they're a great way to get others involved. So what we're offering here is a couple of sets of questions that we think will help with this. So the first set of questions really gets at feelings. So ask yourself, how might you be contributing to the situation? What assumptions are you making? How can you challenge your assumptions? What can you say in a non-threatening way to share your perspective, right? And, understand, you want to share your perspective and also your feelings with the other person. So imagine the impact of asking yourself these types of questions as you prepare for a difficult conversation, how you would challenge yourself. Second, a set of questions that deal with perspective, right? So again, these help you prepare and kind of deepen and broaden your perspective. If you were looking at this situation from the other person's perspective, what would you see? How might you feel? And really challenge yourself, how might you even feel differently? If I ask the other person to identify the cause or describe the situation, what might he or she say? So you're kind of trying to really understand the situation from multiple points of view, not just your initial reaction, right? If you remember earlier, we talked that fight or flight reflex. This is really helping you to challenge that fight or flight reflex. That's just such a common part of dealing with difficult conversations. And finally, if you could do one thing to resolve the conflict, what would it be, right? Come to terms with that. Last series of questions help develop dialogue, right? So what might you say to focus on the problem, not the person? Remember, this isn't a disagreement with the person specifically, it's an issue, right? It's an issue, and part of dealing with difficult conversations is trying to remove the personal aspect from it and get that issue out on the table so that you can work on that issue together. Okay, so it's not about the person, it's about the problem of the issue. What help or support would enable you to resolve the situation? What might you say to acknowledge the other person's point of view and the other person's feelings? So these questions are really essential to just help you prepare for and even in the midst of conversations to give you some deeper opportunity to really explore the situation. Okay. One of the things that we've learned over time and is dealing with these conversations is they can really have a positive impact, right? So dealing with things, putting them out on the table, moving things to resolution can really have a positive impact. And it can have a positive impact on multiple aspects, right? It has an impact on an individual. It has an impact on a family. They can have a positive impact on the organization as a whole, and even you, right? I can tell you from personal experience that when I've dealt with a difficult conversation, particularly something I don't want to deal with, and I move past it, there is a sense of just refresh. There's a sense of energy when you've done something and it goes well. Darla, in your experience, what's the positive impact of having these types of conversations? Do you have any examples?
I think I do. Not all difficult conversations involve patients and families. Some of the hardest ones I've ever had are with staff. And I think that's because we work with them every single day on a one-on-one basis. Or it could be a disagreement you have with a coworker, and you have to address those issues immediately. Putting them off is just going to make it worse. Make sure you have in mind before you start these conversations a focus or a goal for the meeting and what you're hoping to achieve. It's as important in these kind of conversations to manage your emotions, because you absolutely don't want to have some kind of emotional breakdown or outburst during one of these conversations. And addressing these issues is going to make it a healthier environment for everyone. I had an employee that was a low performer and had received multiple documented coaching, we'll call them coaching sessions, and was still not achieving the level that she needed to be at to continue to work in the department. So I had a conversation with her. I had a work improvement plan that I gave her, and they had measurable actions. And of course, what you might expect, at first she was very angry. But as we talked more and we kept the focus on this is what you need to be successful in this department, and I always, even in these conversations, I try to give people choices. And I talked with her about what's going to make you successful with this work improvement plan. How is it going to be easier for you to do this? And so there are ways that you can bring in what they would like, even when it's a conversation like this. And by mentoring that work improvement plan, she actually started making the behavior changes and the improvements she needed to do, and she actually became one of the strongest people in the department. So it helped not only me, because I was able to, work through it, but, I didn't go home and abuse my family because I was upset every single day. And, of course, the organization benefited because she became a really, really productive member of the department.
Great example. I'll add one more thing to this, and that's, again, that individual feeling that, when you've had a conversation like this, that maybe you put it off, you didn't want to have it, but then you do go through the process, you have the conversation, it goes well. The example that comes to mind to me is all of the conversations that you don't have, right, that you're afraid of having, you carry those around with you, right? It's like, imagine if each one of those conversations was a weight, right? A 2 or 5 pound weight, and you put those in your backpack, right? Every conversation that you don't have, you put a weight in your backpack. Imagine how heavy that weighs on you over time, right? Whereas you dump that backpack out, right? Have those conversations, get them out of there. You just do travel, more freely, with more energy, and you can apply more to more positive situations. So we certainly encourage you to have these conversations when they come up.
I agree.
We're almost out of time, but we do have a couple of thoughts, and I think we will have some time for questions coming up. So a couple of thoughts on closing it out. Darla, you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you have these conversations, lead with your whole self. Be 100% invested in whatever conversation it is. And I would say that you listen more than you speak a lot of times, and then you listen some more. Lean in slightly, because that way the person knows that you're fully engaged and interested in what they have to say. And the main thing is be comfortable with silence. Don't try to fill the void with random thoughts. This is a great time for everyone to reflect on what's been discussed, and sometimes that period of silence can be a turning point in the conversation.
Okay, thank you for that. I'd remind folks to manage both the personal side of the equation as well as the practical side of the equation, right? Use your emotional intelligence. Another way to look at it, and this actually comes from Chris and Perry. They described it in a podcast that we're providing to describers. They talk about it in looking at caring and candor. So balance the caring with the candor. And I think that's just another way to remember it. Maybe that will resonate with you. And what about the process?
Then follow a process. You're going to have your own little pieces to the process that you're going to add, but have a standard process. And I'm going to reflect back on what Jim talked about on opening the conversation with purpose of the meeting. For instance, I'm here to discuss what occurred in the OR. Clarify the conversation by sharing information, discussing concerns. For example, if you have any questions as I go through the details of what occurred in the OR, please stop me so I can address your concerns. Develop the conversation by discussing ideas and and the support that's required. For instance, what would you like to see changed? Agree on action plans and follow-up calls and future meetings. And if you give a specific day or time that you're going to follow up, meet that. Don't skip it, because then you're going to lose face with the person you're having that conversation with. And then close your conversation by confirming what's been discussed and the action plans that you're going to be doing moving forward.
Thank you. And lastly, I want to say, you can do this, right? John Maxwell talks about the need, and this is in another one of the resources we've provided to our subscribers. He says, step up, right? So there's a lot of folks who are leaders on the call, I'm sure, and it's even more essential as leaders to be able to step up and really handle those, what he calls tough talks. And I'd also remind folks that these skills work across all aspects of your life, right? Work situations where you have difficult conversations, maybe it's your boss that you need to approach, maybe peers. You take this home with you as well. I'm sure you have difficult conversations with your spouse. I'm sure you have difficult conversations with your children. So these types of skills work really across the entire aspects of your life. I'd also remind you, give yourself permission to practice. Find a buddy, right? Find someone that you can prepare with. Find something it's almost like a workout partner, right? So this having difficult conversations is another muscle, right? A new skill, a muscle that we have to develop. So it might feel bumpy at first, but the more you address things, the more you deal with difficult conversations as they come up, the more you'll be able to deal with them in the future, right? Having these conversations lead to positive impact, right? Not only on your workplace, but on your health. So we certainly encourage you to go forth and turn difficult conversations into great conversations, right? Go out and make a difference. You got this. That's really all we have. I think we're going to shift over to questions. I'm not sure if any of those have come in. Rachel,
Yes.
I think, or Illumine, are you handling the questions?
Yes, and thank you. First of all, thank you, Darla and Jim. So yes, this is our question and answer portion of the session. So please type your questions in the WebEx chat function. I have the first question here. How are tears and crying perceived in this situation? Do they need to be under control, or if they're part of your true feelings, do they help convey empathy and compassion? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, great question. We definitely know that tears can be part of the equation, right? Darla, you probably dealt with these either your own as well as the other individuals. Do you want to field this one?
Absolutely. And I think, honestly, crying with someone is not a bad thing as long as it's done, professionally, and it just shows that empathy. There are times when I get so emotionally involved in a case or even the fact of what's happened, that I do cry, but you have to keep it under control, which can be hard because all you want to do is sob.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and honestly, I've been in conversations with staff that have resulted in tears, and at times we've had to step away, and agree to come back at a later point when we can be more in control of the emotion around the situation.
Perfect. Here's another question. When is it too long to wait to have a difficult conversation? Does it have to happen right away, or can you step away and then take your time first and then come back?
In my mind, and then I'll share my thoughts and then turn to Darla. In my mind, timing is important, right? Because you want to make sure that you're controlling, again, that fight or flight response, right? You could be reacting without thinking if you haven't given yourself enough time. But along those same lines, you can wait too long. There's no hard and fast rule. I mean, I'm not going to say you must do this within 3 days. There's going to be process timing that you have to factor in. You also have to factor in your preparation and being able to maintain the relationship through it. So I wish I could give you a hard and fast rule on timing. There just isn't one. Darla, from your side?
I agree with Jim. It just depends on the case. You may even have a staged approach whenever it's a patient or a family, and you may find out, enough that you can have that initial conversation and then agree to return after you have more information. So I prefer to have the conversations as soon as possible. That's as close to pinning down the timing. But you have to be prepared for that conversation before you can have it.
Okay. Let's move from timing to who should be having this conversation. So the next question is, What if you're not certain if you're the one who should be having the conversation? And here's an example. A coworker isn't following policies and procedure and is directly affecting you. Is that person supposed to have the conversation, or should they allow the supervisor to approach that coworker? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, my thoughts are we want to have a culture across our organization that is, if you see something, you say something, right? Because again, going back to timing. So if you wait, it could have an adverse impact on our organization, on a patient safety, that type of thing. So my belief is, if you see something, say something, but also you're saying it with grace. You're saying it with, with dignity, and you're talking about, the reasons why you're bringing it up, and really tying back to the importance of the situation. So in my mind, if you see something, say something, but do it with respect. You may also want to follow up with a supervisor to let them know that you have had this type of conversation.
Yeah, I agree with Jim. I'm a big advocate of, if you see something, you need to address it. If a supervisor needs to get involved, then absolutely. Now, there are times when maybe you don't feel comfortable addressing that person. It's a situation where you just don't feel comfortable, and then by all means, you should reach out to a supervisor.
But timing could really be delicate, Darla. I'm sure you've heard of times, and you've dealt with situations of, even in the ER, where, someone had to stop a procedure, and, deal with something in the moment, and even confront someone who would be a higher level or even a physician about actions within the ER.
Absolutely. And you're right, we should empower all of our staff to be able to have those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's one last question. So what are some strategies to control your initial reaction when you feel threatened, so that you give yourself the time to process information and respond with a greater level of emotional intelligence? What are some strategies?
Yeah, great question. I think it goes back to a slide earlier where we had some do's and don'ts. First, I think pause, take a deep breath, is one of the first things that we should try to do. Remember to breathe. And then use some of the questions that we put out there. In fact, we're going to provide a handout with those questions and even more to help you think through the situation. So pause, take a deep breath, and try to really transition your thinking from the amygdala into, the neocortex, so that you can get some logical thought around this topic.
And I do that absolutely, as I take a big, deep breath. And mentally, I tell myself that I need to remember that they have a perspective too, and I really try to put myself in that other person's shoes, because there's a reason they're reacting that way. It's something from their past, or it's something that's happened to them, and you really have to try to understand the other person's perspective to be able to control those emotions.
Okay. Well, I know where I said it was the last question, so we're getting a lot of questions, but let me tell the audience, if we did not get to your questions, we will definitely answer them after the session, either on our website or through the LinkedIn page. So again, if we didn't get to your question, do not get discouraged. We'll answer those. So in addition to the resources already listed on our website, our speakers, they have recommended these articles. Let's see on the next slide. Here's some great articles, additional resources. These will be listed on the website this afternoon, so you can reference them. The recording will also be listed at ardenthealth.com/women next week. Instead of hosting a webinar through the month of December, we will be focusing our attention on resources, podcasts, articles, apps, all of those things aimed at helping you live with purpose. Plus, we will be hosting giveaways. Yes, you heard it right. We'll be hosting giveaways for Women at Ardent members. So if you're not a subscriber yet, please visit our website, ardenthealth.com/women, and complete the submission form at the bottom of the page. Stay tuned for more information. And again, if you would like to be connected, stay connected and update Women's at Ardent, please visit our website or text 95159 email at women@ardenthealth.com, or stay connected to social media using the hashtag #ArdentWomen, and we'll see you there. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for attending.
Thank you, Jim and Darla. Thank you.